Picture this scenario for a moment. You've been walking on eggshells around someone for months, maybe even years. Every conversation feels like navigating a minefield. You give and give, trying to keep the peace, trying to be understanding and patient. Yet somehow, you always end up feeling drained, confused, and questioning your own reality. If this resonates with you, you're not alone. Today, we're going to explore why being perpetually nice to certain types of people can actually harm both you and them, and what you should do instead. Many of us, especially those who've lived through decades of relationships and experiences, were raised with the golden rule: treat others as you'd like to be treated. We learned that kindness, patience, and understanding were virtues to be cultivated. And they absolutely are, most of the time. But there's a crucial distinction we need to understand. There's a difference between healthy relationships where mutual respect exists and situations where your kindness is being systematically exploited. When dealing with individuals who display narcissistic tendencies, your natural inclination toward niceness can become a trap. These are people who seem to have an insatiable need for attention, validation, and control. They often appear charming and confident on the surface. But beneath that facade lies a person who struggles with genuine empathy and views relationships primarily through the lens of what they can gain. Your continued niceness doesn't inspire them to reciprocate with kindness. Instead, it often signals to them that you're someone who can be manipulated and controlled. Understanding the narcissistic dynamic. To understand why traditional niceness falls short in these situations, we need to examine what drives narcissistic behavior. At its core, narcissism involves an inflated sense of self-importance coupled with a deep-seated insecurity that the person desperately tries to hide, even from themselves. This creates a constant need for what psychologists call narcissistic supply: validation, admiration, and attention that feeds their fragile ego. When you're consistently nice to someone with these tendencies, you become a reliable source of this supply. Your patience when they interrupt you, your understanding when they dismiss your feelings, your forgiveness when they cross boundaries. All of this reinforces their belief that they can treat you however they want without consequences. You inadvertently teach them that your feelings, time, and energy are less important than theirs. Consider Margaret, a 72-year-old retired teacher from Denver, Colorado. She spent 3 years being endlessly patient with her adult son, Robert, who had developed what she now recognizes as narcissistic patterns. Every phone call became about his problems, his achievements, his needs. When she tried to share her own experiences or concerns, he would either change the subject back to himself or become dismissive and critical. Margaret's natural tendency toward maternal kindness meant she kept making excuses for his behavior, kept trying harder to please him, kept hoping that if she was just nice enough, patient enough, understanding enough, he would eventually reciprocate with genuine care and respect. But here's what Margaret learned the hard way. Her unconditional niceness wasn't helping Robert grow as a person. Instead, it was enabling his self-centered behavior and preventing him from developing the empathy and self-reflection that healthy relationships require. More importantly, it was destroying Margaret's own mental health and self-esteem. The cost of perpetual niceness. When you remain endlessly nice to someone who exploits that kindness, you pay a price that extends far beyond that single relationship. First, there's the emotional toll. Constantly accommodating someone who doesn't reciprocate leaves you feeling depleted, resentful, and increasingly disconnected from your own needs and values. You might find yourself doubting your own perceptions, wondering if you're being too sensitive or unreasonable when you feel hurt by their behavior. There's also what psychologists call learned helplessness that can develop over time. When your reasonable attempts at connection are consistently met with dismissal, criticism, or manipulation, you may start to believe that you have no power to change the dynamic. This can spill over into other areas of your life, making you less likely to advocate for yourself in other relationships and situations where you absolutely should. Perhaps most damaging of all is how this dynamic can erode your sense of self-worth. When someone consistently treats your feelings as unimportant, your time as disposable, and your boundaries as suggestions rather than requirements, it becomes increasingly difficult to maintain a healthy sense of your own value and dignity. Take the example of William, a 68-year-old retired accountant from Phoenix, Arizona. For 5 years, he maintained an exhausting friendship with his neighbor Thomas, who displayed classic narcissistic traits. Thomas would show up uninvited, monopolize conversations with stories about himself, borrow tools and never return them, and become angry or sulky whenever William tried to set any boundaries. William's natural politeness and desire to be a good neighbor meant he kept accommodating these behaviors, hoping things would improve. The result was that William began dreading his own time at home. He found himself parking in his garage and sneaking into his house to avoid potentially running into Thomas. His wife noticed that he had become increasingly irritable and withdrawn. It wasn't until William finally recognized the pattern and implemented some firm boundaries that he was able to reclaim his peace of mind and his sense of personal dignity. What to do instead? The power of respectful boundaries? So if endless niceness isn't the answer, what is? The key lies in replacing unconditional niceness with something far more sophisticated and ultimately more loving. Respectful boundaries combined with consistent consequences. This doesn't mean becoming mean, hostile, or manipulative yourself. It means recognizing that true respect for another person sometimes requires holding them accountable for their behavior. Just as a loving parent sets boundaries for a child not to be cruel, but to help that child develop into a responsible adult. Setting boundaries with narcissistic individuals can actually be the most caring thing you can do, both for them and for yourself. The first step is clarity about your own values and limits. What behaviors are you willing to accept in your relationships? What crosses the line into disrespect? For many people who've spent years being overly accommodating, this can be surprisingly difficult. You may have become so focused on managing other people's emotions and reactions that you've lost touch with your own legitimate needs and preferences. Start by identifying specific behaviors that leave you feeling disrespected or depleted. Maybe it's being interrupted constantly during conversations. Maybe it's having your time treated as if it has no value. Maybe it's being criticized or dismissed when you express your feelings. Whatever it is, recognize that you have every right to expect better treatment in your relationships. Once you've identified your boundaries, the next step is communicating them clearly and calmly. This doesn't mean launching into lengthy explanations or justifications. Simply state what you will and won't accept. For example, instead of saying, "I wish you wouldn't interrupt me so much. I know you're excited to share your stories, and I understand you have a lot on your mind." Try something more direct. "I need you to let me finish my sentences before you start talking." Implementing consequences with dignity. The most crucial part of boundary setting is following through with appropriate consequences when those boundaries are violated. This is where most people struggle, especially those with naturally accommodating personalities. But here's the truth. A boundary without a consequence is just a suggestion, and narcissistic individuals are particularly skilled at ignoring suggestions. Consequences don't have to be dramatic or punitive. They simply need to be consistent and meaningful. If someone repeatedly interrupts you after you've asked them not to, you might calmly say, "Since you're not able to have a conversation without interrupting, I'm going to end this discussion for now. We can try again later when you're ready to listen." Then follow through. End the conversation, leave the room, or hang up the phone if necessary. Consider the story of Patricia, a 65-year-old grandmother from Charleston, South Carolina. Her daughter-in-law Sandra had a pattern of making demanding requests with little notice, often expecting Patricia to drop everything to provide free babysitting or other favors. When Patricia tried to politely decline or suggest alternative arrangements, Sandra would become guilt-inducing or hostile, making comments about how other grandmothers would be happy to help. For years, Patricia gave in to keep the peace, But she eventually realized this pattern was unfair to everyone involved, including her grandchildren, who were learning that manipulation was an acceptable way to get what you want. Patricia began responding to unreasonable demands with calm but firm refusals. "I'm not available on such short notice. Let me know if you'd like to plan something for next week instead." When Sandra responded with guilt trips or hostility, Patricia would simply say, "I can see you're upset, so let's talk when you've had time to cool down." And then she would disengage. The initial pushback was intense. Sandra accused Patricia of not caring about her grandchildren, of being selfish, of causing family drama. But Patricia held firm, and something interesting happened. Over time, Sandra began planning ahead and making requests more respectfully. She learned that manipulation wouldn't work, but reasonable requests made with adequate notice generally would be accommodated. The surprising result of healthy boundaries. Here's what many people don't realize about setting boundaries with narcissistic individuals. While they may initially respond with anger, manipulation, or attempts to make you feel guilty, those who are capable of change often eventually develop more respect for you, not less. This happens because narcissistic individuals, despite their outward confidence, often struggle with uncertainty about where they stand with others. Your consistent boundaries actually provide them with clarity about what's acceptable and what isn't. Think about it this way. When you're endlessly accommodating, you're essentially communicating that you don't value yourself highly, and if you don't value yourself, why should they? But when you demonstrate through your actions that you have standards and expect to be treated with basic respect, something shifts in the dynamic. This doesn't mean every narcissistic person will suddenly become empathetic and considerate. Some may choose to exit your life rather than modify their behavior. And frankly, that might be the healthiest outcome for everyone involved, but those who do stick around often find that they actually prefer the clarity and stability that comes with knowing where they stand. Remember our friend William from Phoenix? When he finally started setting boundaries with his neighbor Thomas, the initial reaction was predictably negative. Thomas accused him of being unfriendly, of changing, of not being the good neighbor he used to be. But William held firm. He stopped answering the door when Thomas showed up uninvited. He insisted that borrowed items be returned within an agreed-upon time frame. He refused to engage in one-sided conversations where he was expected to listen for hours without being able to share his own thoughts. Gradually, Thomas's behavior began to shift. He started calling before coming over. He became more mindful about returning borrowed items. Their conversations became more balanced. While Thomas never became William's closest friend, their relationship became more manageable and mutually respectful. If you've been struggling with similar dynamics in your own life, I encourage you to take that first step today. Identify one boundary you need to set, communicate it clearly, and be prepared to follow through with appropriate consequences. Remember, you're not being mean or selfish. You're being real and authentic, and that's ultimately more respectful to everyone involved. What's one boundary you've been afraid to set but know you need to? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're all learning together in this journey toward healthier relationships, and if this message resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content about building stronger, more authentic relationships in the second half of life. Your future self will thank you for taking this important step toward reclaiming your personal power and dignity. Remember, at every stage of life, you deserve to be treated with respect. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.